Now, calling this chapter an interesting chain of events is definitely an understatement, because my goodness, this definitely didn't turn out like most people expected. And again, I did talk about the possibility of this guy possibly succeeding, because the consensus was that this guy was going to fail. There were memes about the CP0 guy having no chance in interfering with this battle, but then again, we've seen time and time again that only a small distraction is needed for even a battle of this caliber to end. But I have to say that this is a very interesting outcome, and I wonder how things are going to pan out from here on out. But first things first, let's start from the beginning. And as usual, I would appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. Let's go for 1,000 likes, and subscribe if you're new here. Also hit the bell to get notified. Now, this chapter starts off with a scene we have with X-Drake and the CP0 agent. And here we come to see a setup that we had in the previous chapter come to a resolution, in which in the last chapter it was kind of hinted that X-Drake was going to make a move here, and he did make a move in which he was able to stab the CP0 agent in his back. And of course, this was X-Drake's way of accomplishing something in this whole war, or perhaps his debt to Luffy. Though we come to see that this ended up being pointless, because the CP0 agent was still able to make his move and play a role into Luffy's defeat. Now, while X-Drake did injure him to some extent because he had his sword run through this guy, the CP0 agent still managed to deal with X-Drake after the fact by stabbing him with a Shigan to the neck, which ended that whole situation there. Of course, after this, he eventually makes his way to the rooftop and stops Luffy's final attack. Again, no one expected this guy to interfere with the battle like he did, but it makes sense. All he needed to do was distract Luffy for a few seconds to make him lose. It's not like he needed to interfere with the battle itself. He just needed to find a loophole that could make one of the fighters lose, in this case Luffy being that fighter. So again, it wasn't far-fetched. Do I think this guy is going to get a beat down in the next chapter, because he definitely angered Kaido here. At least that's what we get from the last panel. And if you guys remember, the last person that interfered with his battle was also killed, so this guy is in a lot of trouble. Now, moving on to the fight itself, Luffy versus Kaido. First of all, dope choreography, because I feel like every time Snake Man gets on screen, it brings out the versatile nature of fighters, because it's a very unusual form that you can't use regular means to go up against it. And that's what we get to see here with Kaido, in which he transitions between forms to evade Luffy's attacks. And of course, initially he was getting pummeled by Luffy's attacks because he didn't know how they worked and how the form worked, and that's the case for the majority of people who have encountered Snake Man for the first time. I do also want to point out that Snake Man with Conqueror's coding is deadly, not only because of the attack speed, but also because of the attack potential because of Conqueror's coding, right? So he's hitting you fast as well as very powerful. If you're not an Admiral or Yonko or top tier, this form is decimating everyone else from what I can see anyways, unless they have Future Sight or have an ability that can counter it to some regard. But talking about Future Sight here, we do also come to find out that Kaido also has Future Sight. Now, a lot of people were saying that Kaido doesn't have this ability because he doesn't need it, but I think once you reach some sort of threshold of strength, all these abilities come naturally to you, especially when you're considered to be one of the strongest people in the world. So Kaido having Future Sight doesn't really surprise me, but I do see how people would think he wouldn't have it, because again, he's more of an upfront fighter who takes on any attacks that comes his way. But what we're seeing here is that when attacks that do have potential to hurt him, he will most likely avoid it, whether with Future Sight or not. But with Kaido's Future Sight now enabled, he was able to figure out the patterns of Luffy's attacks, in which he was able to counter. And it's very interesting because he does something very similar to Katakuri, in which he makes his body as flexible as possible. In this case, he goes from his hybrid form to his snake-like full transformation, again, which gives him more chance of evading blows because he can slither around attacks. Again, very similar to Katakuri. And he does this with great speed as well, to the point where it's almost like he blitzes Luffy in full transformation because Luffy was barely able to react. But then again, when Luffy uses his Snake Man attacks, he usually remains mobile because he doesn't need to move in that form, because he has the elasticity and the speed. So for the most part, Luffy stays stationary in Snake Man. But ultimately, this gave Kaido the chance to bite him, in which he then takes him up to the sky, and then he tries to use Boro Blast on Luffy. Luffy, unable to avoid this, takes the attack head on, and it blasts him through Onigashima from top to bottom. Though Luffy was able to recover recover, in which he then goes into Bondman. And again, this kind of shows mastery of Gear 4th to some extent. In this case, he goes from Snake Man to Bondman while retaining the limit from the previous form, as he does mention that his time in Gear 4th is limited. So he can transition over between forms in Gear 4th, which is something he couldn't do before because he had to get out of Gear 4th before going into another Gear 4th form, if that makes any sense. Now, Luffy going into Bondman here means that he is going for the more heavy hitter attacks, which we do know that Luffy's strongest attack in Gear 4th is King Kungun. Now, this would be a lot different now because he has Conqueror's Coding, so the attack would be much more stronger. Now, Luffy makes it back to the rooftop and then uses Supreme Kungun, which I am assuming is the Conqueror's Coded version of Kungun, and this had a very strong effect on Kaido. But again, Kaido's durability and endurance is just insane because he recovers just as quickly, in which he returns by attacking Luffy with a upgraded version of the Thunder Bagua in his hybrid form. And again, I don't know if Luffy was using Future Sight there, but he wasn't able to avoid this attack at all, even though he saw the prep coming, right? And it was also powerful enough to almost get him out of Gear 4th, because I think he passed out for a little bit there. And with things getting more desperate and desperate for Luffy, he finally decides to use a final attack. And if this final attack didn't work, he would most likely lose the battle. And before he prepares the attack, we come to see the CP0 agent join in and stop Luffy. And given the fact that the CP0 agent joined mid-attack, Kaido couldn't stop himself. And this ultimately results in Luffy getting clobbered by Kaido's Conqueror's Coded attack. And this reminded Kaido of the instance he had with Odin, in which the old hag interfered with their battle, and we get Kaido's reaction here, in which he seems almost very sad. And again, it seems like he won another battle in the same fashion, and he gets no fulfillment from it whatsoever. And that's why he almost has that almost tragic reaction to it, because his face, you can just tell from his face like he is in despair pretty much. So this was an outcome that Kaido himself didn't want, because he was enjoying himself and everything got ruined because that CP0 agent, tried to interfere. So again, as I mentioned before, this CP0 guy is going to get clobbered in the next chapter. Now, we don't see Luffy passed out, but based on him saying that this was going to be his last attack, essentially means that he was going to run out of energy. Now, I will say something that I did notice in this chapter is that even though Luffy got a lot of hits in, Kaido was seemingly eating a lot of the attacks without any sort of fallout, which is completely different to Luffy, in which Luffy, we could see that he was getting drained with every attack that he got hit with. And it sort of leads me to the conclusion that even if the CP0 didn't interfere, Kaido would have most likely defeated Luffy in Gear 4 then and there. And again, we have to remember that Kaido was still drunk during this entire battle, and Luffy was also pissed at that fact, almost as if the attacks weren't able to sober him up. He took the attacks and recovered just as quickly. So I do wonder if he's awakened already. Who knows? But as of right now, we don't know what's going to happen next. It depends if Luffy is actually passed out or not, but we do know things does not bode well for the CP0 agent. But this was honestly one of the best chapters I've seen, and easily one of the more interesting outcomes that a lot of people were not expecting. And this also ties into Oda's curveballs and twists and turns, so I wonder how things are going to pan out from here on out. Now, I'd like to imagine that Luffy will eventually get back up, but he is going to obtain power from something else, because we know that his haki is drained. So I would like to imagine that his devil fruit will most likely come into play here. Now, how that's going to happen, I'm not sure. Maybe we get the context in which a person becomes awakened, or how they become awakened, because we usually learn about these things through the MC, just like we did with haki becoming stronger through Rayleigh. So I think devil fruit awakening could be shown through Luffy here. There's also the unconscious haki, which we saw earlier in this arc when Luffy was defeated the second time, where even unconscious he was able to talk to people. And this was insane because Luffy's will itself was conveying a message. So I wonder if that's going to play a role here. So it's very likely that we might get a new gear here, or it might be awakening in general, not necessarily a new gear, because gears is something that Luffy creates. So I don't know if he's going to be able to create something on the spot and make an entire new gear with it. So who knows? We'll see what happens. So again, dope chapter, and again, I cannot wait to see what comes next. The next couple of chapters are going to be insane. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I would appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. That helps me push out more content. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Hit the bell if you want to get notified for more videos. You can follow me on Twitter at FerroSpace. But it is Ferro, guys, and I will see you folks later. Peace.